When you think about leadership, I think the typical response is that leadership is for leaders or those in a hierarchical organization that are at the top. But what I've found, and I think most successful executives have found over the years, is that when people lead themselves, then the business itself creates a level of momentum that pushes itself forward. And when you have a fast growing business, you need the growth to be sustained by everyone within the company. You need people picking up all of the areas that are deficient and people seeing opportunities for growth and then capitalizing on those. And in order to execute and drive and grow and not fall apart at the seams with rapid growth, then you need everyone to be an active leader in the company.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
Today, we're going to look at what does it take to truly drive your company, specifically the leadership principles that drive growth. Our special guest is the founder of Buy Box Experts, and he is from the Inc. list, another one of these incredible leaders. His name is Joseph Hansen. Joseph and I talk about some really important things that I feel like will help you figure out how to grow your business. Specifically, we talk about being authentic and what that really means inside of leadership specifically and how that can drive your culture. He's got some interesting takes on this I think you'll find fascinating. We talk about values quite a bit, about the importance of that. And he shares with you how he organizes his values into core values and aspirational and why he does it that way. Also, he talks about the MIT, the most important thing. A really interesting, very simple tactic that you can use and steal about how to align people together with this MIT. And he'll explain that inside the interview today. And then finally, we talk about ego and why that is so important to kill the ego as we grow and evolve to that next level and serve more people around us and connect with others, because ego often gets in the way. Now, very fascinating conversation about the principles of leadership that drive growth. So today, sit back and enjoy this conversation. Now, the thing I want to bring up before that is when you think about your own company, how prepared are your emerging leaders in specific skills of coaching, difficult conversations, accountability, and really how confident are they with these skills and as they evolve and are expected to engage with their team members? Well, if your emerging leaders are not able to perform those skills very well, then you want to check out the free training we have. It's about 4 minutes long, which isn't a lot, but it will help you get some insight about how to actually get those skills to move up. How do you get people to change behaviors, think differently about the core skills of leadership, which we just mentioned? Just go to genehammett.com/training. Now, here's the interview with Joseph Hansen. Hey, Joseph, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Is it okay if I call you Joe?
Joe is fantastic.
We're going to dive into principles of leadership that you've learned as you've grown your business. Tell us a little bit about that business, Buy Box Experts.
Buy Box Experts. We are an Amazon marketing and consulting agency. I started the company back in 2013 after I had built a number of brands myself, and they were digitally native brands, and I had sold the products on Amazon, but also through a website. And I wanted to provide brands a solution that would guide them to selling on Amazon.
Well, I know that Amazon's such a force inside this, and some companies have embraced it very well and some haven't. If you had a chance to talk about one thing that you wish people understood about Amazon that they don't know, what would you say?
Amazon is its own ecosystem. So when investors look at Amazon and they say, "Oh, well, sales are up, sales are down," what they don't realize, what most people don't realize, is that Amazon, its sales come from the contribution of its 1P business or its wholesale business, and then the 3P business. And the 3P business, which is people selling on Amazon's site themselves, is a combination of lots of different types of sellers. It's people reselling product, it's brands themselves, it's distributors, and it's these aggregators that are buying up a bunch of private label brands on Amazon. When you start to understand the ecosystem, then you can start to pull apart all of the other different parts of Amazon.
Well, we're not going to talk about the Amazon business today, although I'm a big fan. There's a few things I'm not a fan of, which is culture at Amazon is a little bit troubling, and I get it. There's a huge business, a lot of hourly workers, makes it a little bit harder. But you have an interesting definition for culture that I think is pretty powerful. What is that definition?
We like to think of culture at our company as like the sum product of all of the interactions of your people. So you'll encounter a number of different business owners or executives that say, oh, well, we kind of have a blank slate culture, or we don't really have a culture. But according to our definition, a company always has a culture. You may have a culture that's more toxic. You may have a more healthy culture. There is no such thing as no culture. There always is a culture because it's the sum product of how you interact with each other.
Well, I agree with this, and it is a simple definition of culture, but you always have one for sure, whether it be good or bad. That's up to how things are getting done and how people are engaging with each other and how they trust each other and what kind of work gets completed. Joe, we're going to dive into what I'm going to refer to as your leadership principles, and I'm kind of curious. Give me just a real brief understanding of why leadership is so important as your company is scaling to 300 employees plus.
When you think about leadership, I think the typical response is that leadership is for leaders or those in a hierarchical organization that are at the top. But what I've found, and I think most successful executives have found over the years, is that when people lead themselves, then the business itself creates a level of momentum that pushes itself forward. And when you have a fast growing business, you need the growth to be sustained by everyone within the company. You need people picking up all of the areas that are deficient and people seeing opportunities for growth and then capitalizing on those. And in order to execute and drive and grow and not fall apart at the seams with rapid growth, then you need everyone to be an active leader in the company. So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying there.
It feels like you're dancing around something, and it's a word that comes up quite often. It's probably one of the books I'm going to write in the future, which is really about a sense of ownership. Do you guys talk about ownership at your company very much? But ownership of projects, ownership of challenges, ownership of the customer experience?
We talk about that in a number of different leadership principles that we have. One of our leadership principles is to become 100% responsible. And what we mean by 100% responsible is to not give yourself any excuse as to why you can't accomplish the goal at hand for the business. And sometimes that involves working with people you don't want to work with, having difficult conversations you don't want to have, reinventing your work, doing the hard things in the business, which is also another one of our leadership principles, work on the hard stuff. Those two things, work on the hard stuff, become 100% responsible, are some of the core elements of what it means to be an owner. I think sometimes we conflate the idea of doing these things, of being 100% responsible, working on the hard stuff, with the idea of being an owner. And what we see is if you don't talk about some of the minutia there or the nuance of that, then the other people in your business, the employees, their idea of being an owner is very different. So we have to distill it. We have to break it apart so everyone in the business understands exactly what you mean by that.
I want to make sure that we are clear about where we're going with these conversations, because you're throwing out a couple of things like, work on hard stuff and be 100% responsible. They sound like values to me. Are these company core values, or do you have a set of principles that are different than your values? How do you distinguish the difference?
Yeah, the way we've done it, and I love a lot of Patrick Lencioni's books. If you've ever read any of those, they're fantastic. The Advantage, I think, is kind of like pulling together a bunch of his different works. And in that book, what he describes is having core values and aspirational values. And we've set 3 of our leadership principles as our core values. And then the other 9 leadership principles, because we have 12, similar to what Amazon started out with, but very different from their leadership principles. Those other 9 are what we call aspirational values. They're ones that we want to live up to and that we strive to live up to. But the 3 core values, those 3 leadership principles, if a customer doesn't have them, an employee doesn't have them, we're willing to lose money over those things, right? We're willing to hurt our business over those core values. And those core values are adopt a growth mindset, learn and habituate effectiveness, and become 100% responsible. And then we have our other 9 leadership principles as well.
I'm trying to write them down, and I think our audience might need you to say them a little bit slower. Adopt a growth mindset.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the core values here. So when we talk about adopting a growth mindset, a lot of that has to do with Carol Dweck's work with the book Mindset, which is kind of the culmination of her 30 years of research at Stanford about a fixed versus a growth mindset. People that are more growth minded view failures and challenges as opportunities to learn and grow. Fixed minded leaders tend to get so perfectionistic that they create toxic teams because they don't ever want to be wrong, or they don't want to be perceived as something was difficult for them, or they didn't know the answer. Growth minded leaders actually build a very healthy team around them because they empower their people with autonomy and responsibility at the same time. So like adopting a growth mindset, the reason we say adopt, a growth mindset, you'll find it in a few people. In fact, a lot of her research shows that like kind of a small percentage of people naturally have it, but most people kind of arrive at things, whether it's genetic or whether this is environmental. The majority of people kind of address most situations with a fixed mindset. So we want people to learn what is a growth mindset, what triggers them into a growth or fixed, and then adopt that growth mindset over time.
And the second one was what?
Learn and habituate effectiveness. And a lot of this stems from Peter Drucker's works, The Effective Executive, and then Morton Hansen's book, Great at Work, Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits. It's about at first accepting that effectiveness is a skill and skills can be learned, and that you can practice these habits that lead to you becoming more effective. And when you teach that to your organization and you develop an insatiable desire to become more effective, you start to see your workforce become much more predictable in how they perform. And you actually start to see your workforce change in how they tackle problems. They start to develop processes that are habitual, processes that are grounded in sort of a science rather than just any person's art to fix things. And in Drucker's words, most of your organization becomes boring in that there aren't a lot of fires to put out every day. And the exciting, challenging work is the stuff that you need to tackle instead of the problems in your business. So learning and habituating effectiveness. Learn it, understand that it is a skill, and then practice it so you become a more effective person.
Now, Joe's been talking about values. One thing that he mentioned, but he didn't spend much time on, was core values versus aspirational. I thought I'd explain the difference. Core values are who we are today. Now, those are very important because you want to make sure that you're able to pull from the team and you're able to look across the team that you have now and make sure your values are aligned with who we are. And I really love to have core values as a center point and a cornerstone of all of your values. Now, you also want to have aspirational values, which is who we hope to be. Now, these values really should be able to guide us of where we're moving to and what life will look like when we get there. These values will be more present and it'll be a part of who we are when we get there. So you want to make sure you have a mixture of core values with your aspirational values. Back to Joe. And you've already talked about become 100% responsible, so we won't dive into that one right now. Joe, you've been talking about these leadership principles, and I know they've come from someplace, but where did they come from? When you were looking at starting a business, most people are only worried about, does my service make a difference? Does it have a product market fit? Can we sell it? What price can we make it at? All these things happen, but you have these leadership principles, which are very different than that. So where did you get these?
Well, I'll answer this in 2 parts really quick. So the first part is that I didn't start Buy Box Experts or any of the other businesses that I've built and sold with these leadership principles. It's the culmination of learnings over a lifetime and over the last several years that brought and honed and built these together. And then the second answer to that is a couple of years ago, I was talking to a mentor about scaling our company. And he said 2 things to me that really stuck out. He said, as your company scales, it will not stay the same and you can't scale everything. What are the parts of your company that you want to scale? Like meaning the cultural parts. What are the parts that you want to remain? You can't, when you're a very, very small company and you have certain types of relationships and interactions with people, he said, as you grow to 100 people or 200 or 300 or 3,000 people, 30,000 people, 300,000, certain parts of your company, you're going to have to let those go. What are the parts you want to keep? He said, and when thinking about that, he says, what is a culture you want to build? he advised me, he said, don't go look at the culture that Apple has, that Zappos has, that Amazon has, that Microsoft has, that the company across the street has. So think about what the best parts of you are and then build your culture around that, because it will be authentic, it'll be genuine, and it will have meaning attached to it that your people can they can identify with that meaning.
Well, I know that you had given them to me before we hit the recorder on, and we don't have to go into what your the best parts of you are, but how did you come to realize what the best parts of you that then allowed you to define them, put them in words, which now shape the culture that you have?
It's a great question. I mean, some of this has to do with like if you go back to like I love Drucker. I love Drucker's works. One of my favorite works of his is where he talks about having a second life, meaning you should be doing something like philanthropic or building an additional career on top of the business that you build to give yourself additional meaning. And in talking about that, he says you should learn to identify your strengths and weaknesses. And this goes back to just the effective executive principles. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Play to your strengths. He says, well, how do you know what your strengths and weaknesses are? I said, well, what you really should do, instead of taking one of these Strengths Finder 2.0 assessments, he said, instead, you should list out the critical decisions that you make, write them down, and then look at them at least 9 months later, usually a year or year and a half later. How do they turn out? And then you'll start to see a pattern of where your strengths lie or they don't lie. And what I saw was that my strengths lied with interacting with people on a philosophical, a spiritual, and a modern business management level. It's those three areas that have to do with a lot of the struggles that I had with depression, anxiety growing up, the challenges I faced in life, and the search that I found, the search that I went on, and then the solution that I found in those things.
That's a really interesting way to come up with your strengths, because I think what's easy is you take the test and the test somehow spits out some answers and you're like, oh yeah, that's somewhat me. But you actually took a much deeper approach to this, looking at these critical decisions you made going back over 9 months. Did I have that correct?
Yeah, and it takes a lot longer. So you have to be patient.
yeah.
Right. And if you keep doing it over time, you tend to notice like certain strengths get reinforced, maybe even you become much more adept at those things. And then some areas that were weaknesses are not as weak, or you see over time, yeah, I'm really weak here. And what I really need to do, instead of focusing on all of my effort and draining all of my willpower at trying to shore up the lack of punctuality that I have. Sadly, punctuality is not one of my core values. Instead, you need to build certain like hedges around the way in which you work to help make up for the difference there. So like one of the things I do with myself is I start most of my meetings at 5 after and I end at 5 before the hour. And it creates a mechanism that allows me to be punctual, that doesn't require willpower from myself. And it gives me the ability to value other people's time. Because it can be insulting to a lot of people to be chronically late to their meetings or to go over in those meetings. But when you set your standard for something like that, it creates a mechanism that allows you to cover weakness, which then allows you to focus all of your effort on your strengths. So you have to be really patient. You learn a lot of cool things.
Now, Joe's been talking about finding your strengths. Now, I think that one of the skills of leadership is to be self-aware. The problem with being a self-aware is it's not always easy. It's not something you do by yourself. So some of the things I'm doing with my clients is, asking them, who do they need to become to be the leader that they need to be? And so this is about being a little bit more self-aware about who they're becoming. There's a few different tools I use inside this, but when they can put into words, who are they becoming and who are they being today that is getting in the way, you have a very strong place to clearly define where they're spending their time and energy when they are being one level and who they want to become. I'll give you a very easy example. I was talking to a client today and he said, we're being very reactive and it really does cause a lot of problems. I said, who do you want to become? He goes, we want to be intentional. And he's talking about himself as a leader, but he really is talking about the entire team structure and the company being more intentional. And so all of our work allowed him to be more self-aware around who is he being, this reactive version of him, and all the things that go with that. And how does he get aligned with his becoming more intentional? The reality of this, after 5 months of working together as a client, he now feels like he's much more intentional, and it shows up in many different areas within his life, professionally and personally. And it has been a huge transformation for him. And so you want to make sure that you're able to do this with your team members. Now, I know I'm doing this all the time and make it maybe sound easy, but you want to make sure that they can put into words who they're being versus who they're becoming. That's a level of self-awareness that will give them insight to growth. Now back to Joe. It's been a fantastic discussion about leadership principles, and going back to something you said about 10 minutes ago, pretty early inside of our conversation, which is be willing to give up business on those 3 core values. Give us a little bit of context around your, I know how important values are for many of the leaders in these companies. And I know some people don't see it as important, but you said, I'm willing to give up business. I'm willing to make some sacrifices to make sure we stay in alignment around these 3 values. What was the context around that?
Well, I think about it this way. If you were to, there's this acronym that we use. We probably plagiarized it somewhere, so I'm not going to claim credit for it. We call it MIT at our company, the most important thing. And we have our leaders list out on our Slack channel every morning what the most important thing is for them to work on. And it's actually evolved to listing out the 3 most important things. But the cool thing about doing this every day, if people are willing and open to receiving feedback, which is part of the growth mindset, going back a second ago, is that if you look at what people list out, it tends to be what's most urgent, or what they feel is most urgent and important. But then if you have a discussion and you say, is that really what's most important? Well, yeah, this is coming up this week. It's like, well, but does that have the greatest impact on you or the business years out? Well, no. Okay, so what's really most important? And so you really dial into what is most important. And this ties back to your question, which is when you talk about being willing to sacrifice business, being willing to sacrifice time or opportunity or other things over core values, it's really about what's most important to you. What is most important to the business over time? Is it to just hit certain financial goals? Is it to hit them a certain way? Is it to provide a certain value in product or service to your customers, to the people within your organization, to yourself? Is it to achieve balance and give enough, I'll call it the kaleidoscope of balance, which is enough personal satisfaction along with building a great business? Is it all those, is it a combination of those things? What is most important? And what is most important to myself and to the people that we brought in our organization is growing in this way. And because we care about these values more than we do about just plain old growth, we're willing to sacrifice over it.
I love the detail that you put into this and how you organize your thoughts. I know that there's a book coming somewhere down the line. We encourage you to get to it. And I know how hard that is, especially when you're trying to grow a business, because I keep pushing mine down the road as well. One last chance. We've been talking about principles of leaderships with you, Joe. What have we not touched on that you feel like is just really important that you just don't want to leave the moment without sharing?
One of the key things we found out, and one of our leadership principles that is in our aspirational ones, is called kill the ego. And it comes from this kind of Eastern philosophy of killing your ego, which sounds a little bit morbid. But when you think about people that you deal with on a day-to-day level, people that are obsessed with themselves, that are in love with themselves, we call them narcissists. People that self-loathe, we call them depressed. And it's kind of like, well, how do you, when we talk about like loving yourself or caring about yourself in order to care about other people or develop yourself first, how do you do that? And what we've found through modern psychology, through neuroscience, and through Eastern philosophy and religion, when you look at all 4 of them, they all share a commonality, which is don't hate yourself. Don't be so incredibly hard on yourself that you create depression or anxiety. Don't fall in love with yourself, so you're a narcissist. Instead, let go of the idea of self or kill the ego. And in order to do that, and to do it in a way that approaches people both in the Western and Eastern philosophies, we found the best way to do that is just have self-compassion. Just forgive yourself quickly. And if you do that, then you find like those are the people, if you combine self-compassion with patience, those are the 2 highest predictors of success in life. And we found that creates a lot of success in our business. And that keeps people from getting defensive. That helps them align on metrics of success. That helps them drive and execute because they're willing to forgive themselves.
Joe, we've been talking about leadership principles and your insights on fast growth. So I really appreciate you being here.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
What a great interview. I really love the detail that he's thought this through about his principles of leadership. All the things that we talked about today really were spot on with the things that I've seen are such an important to growing your business. We talked about culture, how he got there. We talked about being authentic. We talked about the values of the company. That most important thing, hopefully you took some notes on how they use that within the organization. And then finally, killing the ego. Really great conversation. So hopefully you're getting the most out of listening to these podcasts. My job is to help you become an extraordinary leader, help you really have leadership skills, and help you have the own confidence to take your business to that next level and evolve to the next level. Many of my clients are going from 10 million to 20 million or 50 million to 100 million. And it takes a new level of thinking and a new level of confidence specifically to make those transitions. Are you ready? Well, my job is to help you by having the conversations that put a spotlight on what's getting in the way of you evolving and growing within your business. All you have to do is go to genehammett.com and schedule a call. I'd love to talk to you about what's getting in the way and specifically create a plan that will be just for you. And so that you can take that plan and run with it, come back, reflect on it with me over time, but you have a plan that you can work on. Or if you need support and help, I can talk to you about how we could work together. Just go to genehammett.com and schedule a call today. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.